Yes.
Mr. Rogers?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Mr. Wilson? This is yours to cross.
Yes, sir. Mr. Finnegan, one housekeeping thing. I was told by Mr. Cook that his recording ran out of space, I guess a little while ago. So we have a couple of options on video. We could see where his ended and pick up, perhaps from Volusia Exposed might make it accessible to us, since they've also been video recording it. But I'm not sure.
I didn't know you've been recording too?
Yes, sir. That's Mr. Arbitrator.
Okay. So how have you been recording?
This little camera right here, but I guess he ran out of space and he said it stopped at some point this afternoon. But
I'm just confused even who's doing this recording. I know I asked this gentleman to introduce himself to begin with. I understood it was the union recording, but the colloquy at the start of the hearing was it wasn't. That this is Volusia who?
Exposed.
Volusia Exposed.
.com.
It's a citizen's organization, as I understand it.
Okay, so.
But we were recording Mr. Arbitrator from the union camera.
As we said in the pretrial stip, he was going to do.
This is their camera.
Oh,
This is mine.
Two different cameras.
Two different
I
cameras.
didn't know there's two cameras.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Sorry.
Okay.
I knew there were two. The one that I brought up
That's
yesterday
the one
was
that-
the one that Greg had pointed at my pretty face, and I asked him why he was pointing at it.
So I just wanted you to know, can we get a
Oh,
complete
absolutely.
copy? He will give us we will have a complete video copy, I guess is what I'm
Okay.
saying. Okay, thank you.
Good.
Thanks.
Okay, that's fine with me.
Okay.
Thank you for letting me know.
Yes, sir.
Did you also work out what's going to happen with witness Vasquez?
Yes, we did, and I've discussed it with Mr. DeRozier, and I'll let him, I think he has the gist of a stipulation that will make us able to release Sergeant Vasquez. I mean, I
Okay,
keep
you
calling
want
him
this
Sergeant.
on the record?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Officer
let's go on the record. We're coming back from break. It's 4:40. The attorneys, while we're on break, we're going to talk about the remaining witnesses and potentially a stipulation as to one of the witnesses, Lieutenant Vasquez, and I understand the attorneys for the parties may have worked out a stipulation so that witness won't come forward. Mr. DeRozers, would you like to put that stipulation on the record?
Yes, sir. I believe that there were 3 points to the stipulation, so 3 separate things that we'll stipulate to. The first is that Officer Vasquez participated in the reenactment with Lieutenant Milan. The second is that Officer Vasquez was not questioned as a witness during the internal affairs investigation. And then the third is that the city will certify that Union's Exhibits 12 and 13, which are emails from Officer Vasquez to Deputy Chief Batten, were indeed sent by Officer Vasquez to Deputy Chief Batten.
What's the tab of those?
12 and 13.
These are unions,
Yes, sir.
12 and 13.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
That's it. Yes, sir.
Okay, so with that stipulation, Mr. Wilson, you accept those stipulated facts, and we won't be calling Officer Vasquez?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes, sir. We've also released Lieutenant Nick Mathis. So with the understanding, as I heard Mr. DeRozier say this, the chief was his last witness. After my cross, I'll have some brief testimony from Business Agent Greg Cook and briefly from Officer Goins.
Okay, very well.
Just before, one more housekeeping thing. This certainly is the last witness in my case in chief, but I will reserve the right to call a rebuttal witness to the extent anything comes up in the union's case.
Okay, so noted. Okay, you may proceed, Mr. Wilson.
All right, thank you. Okay, Chief, this is the second time you and I have had to meet in this very room, correct?
Correct.
We were here for the Officer Malero arbitration a little over a year ago, I believe, correct?
Yes, sir.
And I think, and for the record, that's M-U-L-E-R-O, Officer Malero. He has now been reinstated with the agency, correct?
Yes.
And you told us that back in that testimony, you have some knowledge of the Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights, correct?
Some knowledge of it, yes.
And as I understand it, it's-
He's still sworn from.
That's right, I'm sorry.
Previous testimony.
that's okay.
Oh, I
No
thought
problem.
you couldn't hear this.
No problem.
Okay.
Yeah, that's-
The question was, you have some knowledge of the state of Florida law enforcement officers' Bill of Rights. I didn't get your answer.
Some knowledge, yes.
Okay. And in fact, you gained more knowledge of it through the Malero arbitration, correct?
I did.
And the state you came from, Pennsylvania, does not have an officer bill of rights, is that correct?
That's correct.
In fact, I did my own little double-checking research last night and of the states that have officers' bills of rights, and I just want to see if what I determined is still your understanding. Again, Pennsylvania did not have one. an officer
They
bill.
have due process. We had due process rights, show cause hearings,
Okay.
so, but not an officer bill of rights.
Okay. I'm going to be just kind of skipping around a little bit. I'm going to go over some of the things you just said on direct, so they may not seem in any particular order, but near the end of your testimony, Chief, I heard you say that what concerned you, it was good police work, you said, up until the search, up until going into the pockets. Is that correct?
Yes, I said that.
So all of the analysis that was gone through by Internal Affairs as to whether Officer Goins believed he was under arrest or was not under arrest, that's not as much of a concern to you ultimately as was once he went into his pockets. Is that correct?
Objection that mischaracterizes his testimony.
Did I mischaracterize, did I misunderstand your testimony, sir?
Yeah, I think I testified that as part of it. But there were other
Okay.
factors that led me to concur with the Internal Affairs report.
Okay, I understood you say it was good police work until going into the pockets, and it was the search and the reports and the lies that came from it.
That sounds
Is that
pretty
right?
accurate.
So what the state of mind of what Officer Goins knew as to whether he believed Mr. Staff was under arrest or not, or simply being detained, that was not as important to you as the actual search. Is that correct?
What was, I'm not sure I understand that question.
Okay. Let me ask it another way. You've been present throughout this arbitration as the representative of the city police department, correct?
Yes.
And you've heard all the testimony. And you understand, and I know you've heard a lot of testimony about whether Officer Goins knew Mr. Staff was under arrest or not. Do you recall some of that
Yes.
testimony? What I just thought I heard you say on direct from Mr. DeRozier's questions near the end of your direct testimony was that it was good police work up until going into the pockets. And what
You heard me say that.
yeah. And so what Officer Goins thought of him being under arrest or not under arrest was not a major factor to you.
Well,
Is that fair to say?
no, that's not fair to say.
Okay. So it is still your concern as to whether Officer Goins knew or didn't know if Mr. Staff was under arrest?
That's part of it. And
Okay.
his words, when
Okay.
he and both the floor continually told the gentleman he was not under arrest.
Okay. And you said that telling someone in response to a question from Mr. DeRozier that they're not under arrest when they are is, in your opinion, not the best police work, correct?
Correct.
But there's nothing that says it's prohibited, correct?
Correct.
And you've watched enough detective shows, as in addition to being a police officer yourself, you've seen the interrogations of the good cop versus bad cop, correct?
I've seen that.
Okay? I've seen it myself, and I've seen it actually done. I'm going to ask you, have you ever seen it done in person? And sometimes one detective is telling the person something that's not true at all, correct? To help to elicit a response.
Yes, that's normally occurs in a controlled setting
Okay.
when, at the police department.
And you knew you certainly had enough time to see it by now, what we've all watched many times. You knew you had the two officers on the scene that night, one with 9 months of experience, correct?
I think Officer Goins had more than 9 months of experience. Otherwise, he would have been on probation.
Well, he wasn't on probation because his termination came after his anniversary. Are you aware of that?
He had to have been there over a year, correct?
He got hired in March of 18, correct? The day he got served, he was off probation. Are you aware of that?
If you say he was.
Okay.
I don't
Okay.
have those dates to match.
Okay.
I mean,
I'm not going to belabor the point. All I'm getting at is you had an officer that was a relatively new officer, correct?
yes.
And with Officer LaFleur, an even more green or more rookie officer, correct?
Correct.
And the same question that I asked to Lieutenant Milan, if you can remember back early in your police career, when you were a road patrol officer, you didn't do everything right, did you?
No, I'm sure I did.
You made mistakes.
Sure.
And we've watched this video enough that, is it fair to say there may have been a miscommunication, or at least a misunderstanding as to what Officer Goins thought when he came on the scene, and as to whether Mr. Staff was under arrest or not?
Possibly, but if you look at the video objectively, they're both saying that the individual is not under arrest,
Okay,
and I'm only securing you. You're not under arrest.
okay.
So I don't know how that can be miscommunicated.
Okay, well,
They communicated that to each other, and Officer Goins communicated that to Mr. Staff several times.
can someone transition from being detained to arrested based on how they act?
They could.
Okay. One of those could be if the individual resists. Is that correct?
Yes.
And we know that, or you're aware that Officer Goins, when he comes up on the scene, I think it's an undisputed fact, would you agree, that he sees Mr. Staff in cuffs? Correct?
Yeah, I think that's
Okay. I know there's some dispute as to whether he saw him resisting or not, but at the very least, we know it's undisputed that he was in cuffs, Mr. Staff, correct?
Yeah, my recollection from the video was he was in cuffs and they were walking toward each other.
Okay. And you see Officer LaFleur hand him off. By that I mean, he I guess hands off Mr. Staff to Officer Goins, and he says, I'm going to go back and talk to the people at the bar.
Yeah, I think he hands him off and says something to the effect, I need to go find out what happened.
Right. And you've also heard the video probably 8 or 10 times sitting here representing the city, have you not, where the first thing that LaFleur says to Officer Goins is an altercation. You hear that word? Do you recall?
I heard that word, yes.
Okay.
I'm not sure that was the first thing he said.
Okay. At least from my ears, maybe I'm not as good at hearing as I thought. That's what I thought I heard was the word altercation, and then he says it a second time, altercation, possibly with the bartender. You recall that?
Yes.
Okay. And he says, I'm going to go back and get it. Would you agree with me, Chief, based on your law enforcement experience? Altercation can mean a variety of things.
Yes.
It can mean from verbal to physical, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And at this point in time, this moment in time, Officer Goins, that's all the information at least that he knows as to what happened with Mr. Staff and the people at the bar, correct?
Correct. And that
Okay.
he's only detained.
And he says he sees the person in cuffs.
He sees the person in cuffs. Yes.
Okay. We can play the video again if you want, but I don't believe we hear LaFleur say the word detained at that moment. Was it later
I think
or earlier?
as he was walking toward Officer Goins, he said you're only detained.
Right, he tells that to staff, but he doesn't tell that to Goins, does he?
He says it out loud. I don't know that.
Okay. Are you believing then, Chief, that Officer Goins heard that?
I don't know what you're.
Okay. Well, then it's the corollary then is, would you agree, is also possible that Goins didn't hear that. He sees him walking, he sees LaFleur walking, escorting a guy by the arm who's in cuffs, and the first words out of his mouth are that we had an altercation. He had an altercation. Is that your understanding?
I lost your.
Okay.
What was your question?
Let's do it real quick. Just that segment. I'm going to play you the, just the one off the floor. Speed it up here a little bit.
Look at the wall. Look at the wall. Put your hand behind that. What's that? It's calling. You're just being detained right now. Why?
Okay. Already a couple seconds have passed. You heard LaFleur say you're just being detained right now. Goins is still a reasonable distance away, correct?
I can see him.
Right, but you don't know, here, I'll back it up. You don't, have you ever reached the conclusion that you think he heard that?
Well, based on that, him immediately, not long after that, telling staff that you're only detained. How else would you know that?
You're saying from Goins saying that later? Okay. So you're saying because of Goins saying that later, that leads you to believe that he knew he was only being detained at this moment?
Possible.
Seeing on the video.
Possible.
Possible. Okay.
So he, altercation with
Sounds like he says, we got an altercation. You hear that?
Yes.
We haven't heard the word detained from Officer Goins, Officer LaFleur, correct?
Before that.
Right. Before.
You got an altercation with the okay, come over here. Listen. You talk. How much have you had to drink today?
Okay. Now later on in this sequence, since we watched it many times, we do hear Goins say, you're not under arrest, correct?
Correct.
And it's based on that, and you've heard the reasons why Officer Goins said that he was trying to de-escalate and calm him down, correct?
I heard those reasons.
Okay. And you disagree with his use of that approach, correct? You said that's not what you would believe is the best police work, correct?
That is nothing that I've ever heard, has ever been trained, and not a law enforcement tactic that I've used.
But again, it's not something that you can point us to that is prohibited in terms of training in this department.
Well, we wouldn't, if we don't train it, answer the question again. It's not prohibited, but we don't train that.
You're sure about that?
That train,
Yeah.
say you're not under arrest when
Yeah.
you are.
Or that you can use what you need to use to de-escalate the situation?
But that's a different, entirely different question.
Well, could that be telling someone they're not under arrest and see how they respond?
I guess.
You said that near the beginning of your testimony that you are the one that requested the IA, correct, in this case? But you sat here through Lieutenant Milan's testimony, did you not, and heard him admit that the, quote, citizen complaint that he wrote was what initiated this process, correct?
I did hear him say that.
And that was the document that he titled citizen complaint, correct?
That's correct.
And it really was not a citizen complaint, was it?
Yeah, I don't think, I think that was a form that he used. And I think it was an error on his part that I didn't catch either when I signed it.
Okay.
I think it could be better characterized.
And if you look at City's Exhibit 14, just want to make sure we're referring to the same thing in the black notebook. 14. And it's the same as our Exhibit 5. This is the complaint form that we're talking about, correct?
Yes, sir.
So even though, so in reality, the person that really requested the IA was Lieutenant Milan. You authorized it. Is that fair to say?
No, that's not. He brought to my attention, and to the deputy chief's attention, some video and some police reports, and I made the decision to initiate the internal affairs investigation. He prepared this memo for me, and then I told him, you know, I made the decision, and I told him, Lieutenant Milan, I'm going to initiate an investigation, prepare the form, and he did.
Had Lieutenant Milan never sent you this, you weren't independently going, you would never watch this BWC. You're too busy as a chief. This wouldn't have come across your desk.
That's right. The only reason
Right.
we knew about the BWC and this issue was it was a Mr. Dempsey, I think was the name of the attorney, who
Right.
sent that letter, and then you heard testimony from Lieutenant Milan that he reviewed that before he, as part of our policy, before he, was going to relinquish that.
Right.
So that if there were any redactions or anything that needed to take place, he could do that.
Okay.
And then he came to us
Let me go
with
back.
concerns.
But my original question, I think you answered my question in essence. Lieutenant Milan initiated it, but you authorized it. That was my
What do you
question.
mean by initiated it?
He initiated the process to get this IA started. You just signed off on it, authorizing it. Again,
I think I don't know if we're splitting hairs.
I think we're splitting hairs, playing semantics, but had you not received this document, none of us would be sitting here today, correct?
No, had I not received the body-worn camera and the police reports to review, I wouldn't have told him to prepare this report to send to him.
It's the chicken or the egg. You
Yeah.
wouldn't have got the BWC
Is that what you were
but
asking?
for Lieutenant Milan sending this to you, correct?
I don't know if you and I are on the same page here. Not sending this to me, but providing me with the information to review,
Right.
and then sending this to me.
That's what he
Okay.
says. Find attached a detailed call history along with BWC video. Doesn't he say that, Chief?
Yes.
So he sent you all of this, and then you check a box, initiate an investigation, and sign off the same day, correct?
Correct. No,
Looks like
I
2-5 and 2-5.
I don't think it was the same day.
So this is not accurate?
No, I believe what occurred, and this is all, of course, 2.5 years ago.
Yeah.
He received the information from Mr. Dempsey on the 28th of January, I think it was.
Correct.
And at some point after that, maybe it was the 28th, maybe the 29th, I don't know. Deputy Chief Batten comes to me and, said that Lieutenant Milan came to him and has some concerns with a video and police reports. And so, at that point, I looked at it, okay?
Okay.
And then and again, I don't remember exactly, what day I looked at it.
Okay.
But this is the day, the 5th, is the day that it was initiated officially,
Okay.
because I signed it.
Okay. And you know enough about the Office of Bill of Rights now to know that whenever that clock starts,
Started that day.
that's your 180-day clock. That you hit the timer.
Yes, sir.
You got to get that thing done in 180 days or you violated his rights, correct?
Yes, unless there are extenuating circumstances.
One of those 6 enumerated exceptions, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So, February 5th, we get this ball gets rolling. And by the way, the letters from Mr. Dempsey's office, including Mr. Dempsey and his paralegal, neither one made any accusation that the officers had treated his client rudely, improperly, violated his rights or anything, correct?
I don't independently know that, but I heard Lieutenant Milan's testimony.
Well, and you saw the letters that are now in evidence, correct?
I didn't read those letters in full,
Okay.
but I did see that they're in there.
Do you have any reason to doubt that one is a preservation of evidence letter and the other is a request for documents?
No, I think those were put in there.
Okay. Okay. And the reason I ask that is, in this very room, you sat here for Malero's arbitration. You remember, it was a whole different kind of letter in that case, wasn't it?
Yes.
It was a letter where an attorney was demanding some money, correct?
Yes.
We don't have that in this case, do we?
No.
Okay. So whatever we call this citizen complaint, the fact remains that Mr. Lieutenant Milan was not a citizen making a complaint, correct? He misworded this document. He used wrong words.
Yeah, I think he could have used a better subject.
And the irony is, that's part of the issues in this case, is a choice of words of search versus pat, or arrest versus detain, correct?
No.
I mean,
I think it's a little more involved than that.
Would you agree with me that that's part of the whole reason we've been here the last couple of days is, was someone under arrest or were they detained? Was it a search or was it a pat?
No, that was part of it, but the other part was then writing reports and filing affidavits and arrest documents and taking an individual in jail overnight that wasn't warranted.
And by the way, Officer Goins didn't do that, did he? He only wrote a supplement to the report.
He wrote a police report.
Right.
He characterized that he did a search incident to a lawful arrest.
Yeah.
And I believe the evidence has shown that that's not correct.
Okay. And the final IA report didn't sustain the finding of a false arrest, correct? Remember what we went through just a couple hours ago?
I didn't hear that, yes.
That the final report you got from your investigator, your top investigator is Lieutenant Milan, correct?
That's correct.
He made no finding on the 1.8.2 charge, which was whether the arrest or detaining was lawful or not, correct?
That's correct. But he did have a finding on integrity and truthfulness and other sustained charges.
Now, you concluded that, you said to Mr. DeRozier's question that you concluded there was no support for the resisting without violence charge against Mr. Staff, correct?
That I observed in the video, yes.
But I thought I also heard you say that you agree it is subjective, it's in the officer's discretion as to whether someone is resisting. Would you agree with that?
Sure, yes.
And not to beat that horse any further, but we've talked about what could have been seen, what couldn't have been seen, and from what distance ad nauseum in this case. But is it fair to say that you also share Lieutenant Milan's belief that Officer Goins could not have seen what he claims he saw, and that is some resisting?
Based on my review of the internal affairs report and the body on the camera, no, I don't believe he could have seen what he said he saw.
And you agree that the body-worn camera, only if it's in your sternum of your body, on your person as you're driving, we've seen the video many times, it essentially looks at the steering wheel. correct?
Correct.
And so anything that Officer Goins claims he saw, obviously, was not from his camera, but from his eyes, correct?
Correct.
You also heard the testimony that this officer to my left, Officer Goins, is a certified trained marksman, correct?
I heard that
He
testimony.
even teaches on it, correct?
I heard that testimony.
You have any reason to dispute that?
No.
You have any reason to dispute the testimony that you saw in the transcript of his testimony when he was actually in the internal affairs and in this very proceeding under oath, that he is trained to hit a target at 700 yards?
No, I have nothing that I can dispute that with.
Okay. Do you have anything to dispute that Officer Goins likely, if not definitely, has probably better eyesight than any of us in this room right now, based on that ability alone?
Are you asking me if I think that he has the best eyesight of anybody in the room? I don't know what people's eyesight are here.
Could you hit something at 700 yards, Chief?
I hit things at 700 yards when I was in the Army, yes.
Could you do it now? Are your eyes as good now as they would be as Officer
Are
Goins
we
is?
talking about during the day or night, or what conditions? Because
We're going to get to that because the conditions you drove it in, from what I understand, weren't exactly the same. Correct? You didn't drive it at a top rate of speed near 1 a.m. in your own recreation, did you?
I did not.
I didn't think so, and I threw that question out there without even knowing the answer. But I assume when Alex asked you, and you said, yeah, I went and drove it a couple of times, is what I wrote down. You remember saying that? You didn't even try to recreate the same conditions that Officer Goins was in, did you?
I didn't need to. I had an internal affairs report to rely on.
An internal affairs report that purported to have a reenactment with no measurements, no documents, no photos, no testimony, correct?
We had testimony, didn't
No, sir, you did not. You had remember, you had the lieutenant who says, I'm not a witness, nor is Officer Vasquez, who works for me. The only, quote, testimony we have is the self-serving statements of
Objection.
Lieutenant Milan. I want to make sure, are you,
I heard it.
I'll withdraw it. Are you contending that Lieutenant Milan's statement of what he told Officer Goins he did at the second interview on June 7, 2019 was evidence?
No.
Okay. Well, and you heard Lieutenant Milan, the person who claimed he did a reenactment, say under oath in this very room today that he has no notes, no recordings, no photographs, nothing to support the reenactment other than him telling us he did it. Is that correct?
That's the testimony that I heard, correct.
In fact, on the fly, yesterday, Alex went and got two, I don't know what you call them, grids of a few city blocks to help support this notion of a reenactment. But, Chief, you never saw any documents, did you, to support that there was a reenactment, did you?
No.
And again, he did his reenactment, you heard in this room, at around 5 to 6 a.m., nearly 6 months after the incident, correct? Sometime in June of 19.
The best of my recollection.
Did you ask him to go do that reenactment?
No, I did not.
And did you ask Deputy Chief Batten to ask him to go do the reenactment?
No.
Okay. All right. And so the only reenactment in answer to Mr. DeRozier's questions of just a few minutes ago that you ever did was you just driving north on Woodland but not at a high rate of speed, correct?
Yeah, I drive north on Woodland a lot.
Okay. And you believe, is it your belief that Officers Goins and LaFleur collaborated on their report?
What do you mean by collaborating?
That they got together and discussed what they were going to write? LaFleur in the charging affidavit and
Goins in his supplement?
I don't have any direct knowledge that that occurred.
Okay. And you heard Officer Goins say in this room under oath that he did not read the charging affidavit of Officer LaFleur before he wrote his supplement. You recall hearing that?
Yes, I believe I recall it.
In fact, if they were going to collaborate and work together to cover up an improper arrest and an improper seizure of evidence, wouldn't it make sense to you, Chief, that they would have conferred together? Got your story straight?
Possibly, yes.
But yet we know, you know from the charging affidavit, that Officer LaFleur thinks he took the knife off of the suspect, and we can see from the video he did not. Is that correct?
That's what was demonstrated, yes.
Yeah, you agree. You have nothing to dispute that it was Officer Goins that took the knife off of Mr.
That's
Staff.
very clear that he took the knife off.
I'll spend just a quick moment on a couple of the emails by you, Chief. First of all, if you'll turn to tab 19 in the union's notebook.
19.
Actually, go to, I think it's 8. Yeah, go to 19, sir. And Chief, is this an email exchange between you and Deputy Chief Patton?
Yes.
And does this refresh your recollection, Chief, that you asked does this refresh your recollection that you asked former Deputy Chief Gary Patton to make some changes via email?
Yes, refreshes my memory.
Okay. Do you recall, as you sit here today, what those changes were that you asked him to make?
My recollection is that I asked him to make some edits and changes for clarity and some punctuality. There were some spelling errors. He actually, my recollection was, sent me a correspondence asking me to take a look at it, that he hadn't had a chance to look at it, and if I saw any errors or omissions or anything that I thought could be cleared up, to send those to him.
Okay.
And I did.
Turn back one tab to tab 18, if you will, sir. This is also on July 5th. This might be what you're referring to. This is from Deputy Chief Patton to you, July 5th at 4:08 p.m. You see that, sir?
Yes, sir.
And he says, again, I made the changes you point out in your email, and then he has this attached final draft. Do you see that, sir?
Yes, sir.
If you'll just turn to the third page of this total exhibit, it's got page 2 at the bottom. I want to ask you about this one red sentence here. Chief Umberger reviewed the circumstances and immediately ordered an internal investigation to look into the incident. You see that, sir?
Yes, sir.
Is that an addition that you had requested to be made?
I don't recall requesting that. I think all the areas that you see in red were Deputy Chief Patton's additions, changes, but I don't recall asking him to put that there.
I also see in the next paragraph in red, to a wall and a recessed alcove. You see that, sir?
I see that.
Would that have come from former Deputy Chief Patton as well?
Yes.
Would you agree that by adding those words that at least implies to the reader that it makes it even more or less believable that Officer Goins saw what he claims he saw?
No, I think it demonstrates exactly what happened in the video.
Well, I've watched the video now, we all have many times. It doesn't appear to me that when Mr. Staff is turned and told to face the wall that he's in a recessed alcove.
No, I think he was, sir.
Well, you can see the two police crews as the arm is being spun around on the street. Now, to be in an alcove, to me, I want to see if you agree, Chief, that's like a cutout, an alcove. I'm trying to see if we could, like back there behind where the speaker is. Would you describe that as an alcove to your right, Chief? That little cutout area?
Yeah.
Okay. Do we see anything from the video that looks like you have Officer LaFleur taking him by the arm and taking him into a recessed area like that where he's out of sight?
Yes.
You see that from that video?
Yes.
Okay. And yet you don't deny that as he's being spun around, being cuffed, we can see the two police cruisers within just the one has been there of LaFleur's and the other one coming up. Do you agree with that?
Yeah. I can see some of that.
Okay. You don't believe that would be more consistent with it being he was up against a straight wall like this?
My recollection of the video and what I know is out there, there's a cut out there, an alcove at that business.
Long and the short of it is, though, would you agree, Chief, neither you nor Deputy Chief Batten can definitively put yourself in the police cruiser at that exact moment in time, turning back the hands of time, and say what Officer Goins saw? Correct?
I cannot put myself back in his police cruiser now.
And you can't say specifically what he saw or didn't see. You can only make your best educated guess, correct?
I can, by the preponderance of the evidence, draw a conclusion, which I did, that he could not see what he said he saw, based on the body worn camera footage.
So you chose ultimately to accept the report of Lieutenant Milan in this case with that same conclusion, contrary to the officer who said he saw it with his own eyes, correct?
That, coupled with their statements, that would lead a reasonable person to conclude that he was not under arrest.
I don't believe we've moved exhibits. No, 18 is in evidence. I showed you 19 briefly, which was your emails behind the next tab. And you said you didn't recognize this email, right, sir?
Which one? 19?
19?
Yes.
Okay. This time I'd like to enter into evidence what's been marked as Union's Exhibit 19.
No objection.
Union's Exhibit 19 is accepted today.
And now, Chief, if you'll turn to tab 21, I just want to have you identify for the record. This appears to be the notice of proposed discipline dated July 12th from you to Officer Goins. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And it even has your initials by your name. Is that correct, sir?
Yes, this was prepared for me normally prepared by Lieutenant Milan or Deputy Chief Batten.
Okay.
Just for the record, my notebook, your tab 21 doesn't have anything in it.
Oh,
Just
okay.
Give him mine, because I have a copy of the.
Okay,
proposed
all right,
discipline
thank you,
anyway.
sir. Thank you.
There's two.
we make sure it's in the white notebook.
Is there two in that notebook, Chief?
There's also LaFleur's in here.
Oh,
That's,
okay. Yeah, I only have.
We want to make sure it's in the notebook that Chief Umberger has, because those notebooks are what's going to our court reporter. who's
Correct, yes.
gonna Attach the exhibits to her transcript.
Yeah, we have LaFleur's. If you want to, everybody open your notebook and take out the last part of 21.
Well, I have the 20, because I have it.
So 21 should be a 2-page notice. And then behind that, I'm going to take out the floor again, apologies. And then a, once the unnecessary things are removed, Mr. Finnegan, it should just be the first 2 pages. Everything else you can set aside, just the July 12th notice of proposed discipline.
Can I show you what I have? Okay. Mr. DeRozier brought me a whole batch, and I'll give him back.
That was everything I had
It
at
was.
21.
That's all it should be.
Okay.
Okay. I can get rid of these.
It's all yours.
Okay. Let me make sure the one that the chief has. Chief, can I see that in just a minute? Okay. Okay, now Chief, what you have in front of you should be just 2 pages of the notice of proposed discipline.
Yes, sir.
Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And is this something that you provided to Officer Goins?
Yeah, I probably didn't provide it to him. It was probably provided to him by Lieutenant Milan
Okay.
or the deputy chief.
All right, this time I'll move into evidence what's been marked as Union's Exhibit 21.
No objection.
Union's Exhibit 21 is accepted in evidence.
And then Chief, behind it, tab 22, notice of final proposed discipline.
Yes, sir.
Hopefully this is only, no, it's also got the floors.
Okay.
So again, just the first 2 pages, pull out the last 2. Yeah, let's go in. Grab those. Thank you. And then the 2 up there. Thank you, sir. And this is the notice that effectively terminates the employment, correct? I mean, this puts the officer on notice that he's being recommended for termination, correct?
Yes, this would have been after the show cause.
Okay. And I know you mentioned that ultimately the final decision maker is the city manager. But in termination cases, at least since you've been chief, in the majority of instances where you have recommended termination, isn't it true, Chief, that the city manager accepts your recommendation?
Yes, he's accepted, I believe, all of them,
Okay.
to the best of my recollection.
So when Mr. Rozier was saying that Mr. Ployce obviously can disagree with you if needed, at least in termination decisions, he has always accepted your recommendation, correct?
To the best of my recollection.
And then,
You would think, I would remember if you didn't.
okay, yes, sir. And then when you were asked about the show cause hearing, you said that there was nothing offered in the show cause hearing about the officer's Bill of Rights. Do you recall saying that, sir?
I do recall saying that.
I just want to ask you about the grievance form that was submitted in this case. And if you'll turn to tab 24 in this book, sir, let me know when you're there. Okay. This is the grievance that was submitted by the union through Greg Cook, the business agent, on August 1st of 2019. You see that, sir? At the bottom of page 1?
It was signed by him on August 1st, yes.
Yes, sir. And there's a certain time frame that a grievance has to be submitted. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And so Mr. Cook, on this grievance form, which is already into evidence as Exhibit 24, he does cite to 3 articles in the middle of the page there, doesn't he? Article 8, 8.1, 8.3, and 8.7, correct?
Yes.
So with that in mind, I just wanted you to turn the page. Is that your signature at step 2, Chief, or your initials?
Yes, sir.
And is that your writing that termination stands for serious violations of department policies?
Yes,
And is that, did you date it on 8/8/19?
I did.
Okay. So you were aware that in this grievance submitted on behalf of Officer Goins by Business Agent Cook, that those 3 articles were referenced, correct?
Yep, 3 articles of the contract were referenced after the show cause hearing.
Okay.
Yes.
And the union is not required to disclose all of its bases in a show cause hearing, are they?
I don't think the union's required to do anything.
Okay. Well, in fact, they can, if they learn of other information that may support a violation of one of the articles, they can raise those in the grievance, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And if you'll just turn all the way behind tab 1 for just a moment, at the very front of the book. Sorry, sir. These are